She helped a helpless stranger. The next day, the Korean Mafia boss sent 4 bodyguards to her cafe. The scent of cinnamon and cardamom was my religion. Every morning at 4:30 a.m., I'd unlock the glass door of Chai and Pages, my combination cafe and bookshop, and the aroma of spices simmering in milk would wrap around me like a prayer. The steam from the chai pots fogged the windows, creating a barrier between me and the cold Seattle dawn. Inside, surrounded by worn paperbacks and the hiss of the espresso machine, I was safe. I was in control. I was enough. But that illusion shattered the moment an old man collapsed against my door during the worst rainstorm of the year. I should have known then that kindness would cost me everything. The last ordinary day. The rain had been relentless for 3 days straight, turning Seattle's streets into rivers and driving most people indoors. It was nearly closing time, 8:45 p.m., and I was alone in the cafe, wiping down the counter for the 3rd time when I heard it. A soft thud against the glass, like a bird hitting a window. I looked up from my cleaning rag to see an elderly man pressed against the door, his face pale and strained. His expensive wool coat was soaked through, clinging to his thin frame, and rain streamed down his weathered face. For a moment, our eyes met through the glass. His were dark, intelligent, and filled with something I recognized immediately: exhaustion that went bone deep. I dropped the rag and ran to unlock the door. "Sir, are you okay?" I asked, helping him inside. He was surprisingly light, as if his bones were made of air. Water pooled around his feet on my clean floor, but I didn't care. "I'm sorry," he said in accented English, his voice refined despite the rasp. "I didn't mean to intrude. The rain. I couldn't find my car." "Don't apologize," I said firmly, guiding him to the corner booth, the one with the best cushions. "Sit. Let me get you something warm." I grabbed a clean towel from the back and draped it over his shoulders, then hurried to the kitchen. My hands moved on autopilot as I prepared what my Halmione used to make for me when I was sick: a simple but perfect cup of masala chai with extra ginger, and a plate of honey-soaked hotteok I'd made that morning. When I returned, he had removed his coat. Underneath, his suit was clearly expensive, the kind of tailoring that whispered rather than shouted wealth. His watch alone probably cost more than my monthly rent, but his hands trembled as he wrapped them around the cup I offered him. "Thank you," he said, taking a slow sip. His eyes closed, and something in his face softened. "This is extraordinary. What is this?" "Chai, my grandmother's recipe." I sat across from him, studying his face. He had the kind of features that spoke of a hard life lived with dignity. Deep lines around his eyes, a scar near his left temple, silver hair cut with precision. "Are you waiting for someone? Can I call anyone for you?" "My driver is coming," he assured me, but made no move to use a phone. I told him to take his time. I needed a moment of quiet. We sat in comfortable silence while he ate the hotteok with slow, deliberate bites, savoring each one as if it were a rare delicacy. Outside, the rain hammered against the windows, but inside, surrounded by books and the lingering scent of spices, it felt like a sanctuary. "You run this place alone?" he asked after a while, his gaze traveling across the mismatched furniture, the shelves crammed with used books, the chalkboard menu with my careful handwriting. "Just me," I confirmed. "It's small, but it's mine. I opened it 2 years ago with money from 3 jobs and a lot of stubbornness." A smile touched his lips. "Stubbornness is an undervalued virtue. What's your name, young lady?" "Maya Reyes," I said. "And you?" "Han," he said simply. "Just Han." Something about the way he said it made me think it wasn't his full name, but I didn't push. In Seattle, people came to coffee shops to hide as much as to connect. I understood that. When he finally stood to leave an hour later, the rain had lessened to a drizzle. A sleek black sedan pulled up outside, the kind with tinted windows and a presence that made other cars seem shabby. But Han moved slowly, wincing with each step, and when he tried to lift the 2 shopping bags at his feet, he nearly dropped them. "Let me help," I said immediately, grabbing my rain jacket from the hook. No, I couldn't possibly. I insist." I was already picking up the bags, surprised by their weight. Books, I realized. Heavy hardcovers. Besides, I'm closed now anyway. It's no trouble. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "You are very kind, Maya Reyes." The walk to his car was only 30 feet, but the drizzle still managed to soak through my jacket. The driver, a young man with sharp eyes and an earpiece, immediately exited and opened the rear door, his face a mask of professional concern. "Mr. Han, I was about to come looking for you," he said in Korean, shooting me a suspicious glance. "I was perfectly fine, Junho," Han replied in the same language, which I understood perfectly, though I gave no sign of it. My mother had made sure I was fluent. This young woman provided shelter and comfort. I placed the bags carefully in the car, and Han turned to me one final time. He took my hand in both of his skin paper-thin and cold, and held it gently. "Kindness is the rarest currency, Maya," he said softly, "and it will always be repaid. Remember that." Before I could respond, he was in the car, and it was gliding away into the rain-slicked night, leaving me standing on the sidewalk with a strange feeling settling in my chest, like I'd just opened a door I couldn't close. I should have listened to that feeling. The reckoning. The next morning arrived with deceptive normalcy. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the city washed clean and gleaming under a rare appearance of weak sunlight. I went through my usual routine. Lights on at 5 a.m., ovens heating, the first batch of baked goods prepared with the meditation of repetition, cardamom rolls, honey hotteok, masala chai brewing in the large pot. By 6:30, my first regulars were trickling in, Boeing engineers grabbing coffee before their commute, elderly Mrs. Chen who always ordered tea and read the newspaper for exactly 1 hour. Everything was normal until 8 a.m. That's when they arrived. The door opened, and 4 men entered in perfect synchronization, a choreography of intimidation. They were all Korean, all wearing identical black suits that probably cost more than my entire inventory, all moving with the fluid grace of trained fighters. Conversation in the cafe died instantly. Mrs. Chen looked up from her newspaper, her eyes widening. The 2 students in the corner booth suddenly found their laptops fascinating. The men said nothing. They simply positioned themselves at strategic points around my small cafe, one by the door, one near the register, 2 flanking the bookshelf wall. Their hands were clasped in front of them in identical postures, their faces expressionless, their eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses despite being indoors. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. I stood frozen behind the counter, my heart hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. Every instinct screamed danger, but I forced myself to stay calm. I'd grown up in tough neighborhoods. I knew how to handle myself, or so I thought. "Gentlemen," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "if you're here for coffee, you're welcome to order. If you're here for something else, I'd appreciate you stating your business." The one nearest the register, slightly taller than the others, with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, turned his head toward me with mechanical precision. "We're waiting," he said in Korean. His voice was flat, emotionless. "Waiting for what?" "For you to come with us." Mrs. Chen gathered her things with shaking hands and scurried out. The students weren't far behind. Within minutes, my cafe was empty, except for me and these 4 silent sentinels of menace. "I'm not going anywhere with you," I said, switching to Korean to show I understood every word. "And you're scaring away my customers. Please leave." For the first time, a flicker of something, surprise maybe or reassessment, crossed the man's face. But he didn't move. The standoff lasted exactly 7 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on the wall, each tick stretching into eternity. Then the door opened again. The man who entered was younger than the others, mid-30s at most, but the shift in energy was immediate and profound. The 4 bodyguards straightened imperceptibly, their postures sharpening with respect that bordered on fear. This was clearly their superior, and the authority rolled off him in waves. He was devastatingly handsome, in the way of Korean drama actors. Sharp jawline, perfect skin, eyes so dark they looked black. His charcoal suit was immaculate, his black hair styled with careless precision. But it was his presence that dominated the space. He moved like a predator, each step controlled and deliberate, and when his gaze landed on me, I felt dissected, analyzed and categorized in the span of a heartbeat. "Maya Reyes," he said, not a question. His English was flawless, barely accented. "I am Han Tai-jin. We need to talk about my father." The room tilted slightly. Han. The old man's name. The resemblance was there now that I looked for it. The same refined features, the same intelligent eyes, but where the father's had held warmth, the son's held ice. "Your father?" I repeated, trying to piece together what was happening. "He seemed fine when he left last night. Is he okay?" Something flickered in Tae-jin's expression, too quick to read. "He's dying. Terminal cancer. 6 weeks, maybe less." The blunt statement hit me like a physical blow. I thought of the old man's trembling hands, his exhaustion, the way he'd savored each bite of food as if it might be his last. "I'm so sorry," I said automatically, "but I don't understand what this has to do with me." "My father," Tae-jin said, moving closer to the counter that separated us, "is very particular about his final wishes, and you, Miss Reyes, have become one of them. I served him tea and let him wait out the rain. That's all." "That's not all." His voice hardened. "You showed him kindness without knowing who he was, without wanting anything in return. Do you have any idea how rare that is in our world?" "Your world," I corrected, "not mine." His lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. "Your world and mine collided the moment you opened that door to him. Now you're part of his story, and mine." "I'm not part of anything," I said firmly, my fear giving way to anger. "I run a cafe, I help customers. That's where it ends. Now please leave before I call the police." The 4 bodyguards exchanged glances. One of them, the youngest, actually suppressed what might have been a smile. Tae-jin, however, didn't react at all to my threat. "The police won't help you, Miss Reyes. Half of them are on my family's payroll, and the other half know better than to interfere." He reached into his jacket. I tensed and withdrew a thick cream envelope. "My father wishes to see you. Tonight, 7 p.m. The address is inside along with a non-disclosure agreement. You'll be compensated for your time in silence." He placed the envelope on the counter between us. "And if I refuse?" I asked, not touching it. For the first time, real emotion showed in his face, a flash of something dangerous and barely controlled. "You don't want to find out. My father gets what he wants. Always. Refusing him would be inadvisable." "Is that a threat?" "It's a fact." He adjusted his cuff, the gesture somehow more menacing than any overt aggression. "The car will arrive at 6:30. Wear something nice." He turned to leave, his men falling into formation around him like well-trained wolves. At the door, he paused and looked back. "My father believes you're special, Miss Reyes. For his sake, I hope he's right. Disappointment is something neither of you can afford." Then they were gone, leaving behind only the lingering scent of expensive cologne and the envelope on my counter, heavy with implications I didn't want to consider. I stood there for a full minute, my hands shaking, before I finally opened it. Inside was an address in the Washington Park neighborhood, where Seattle's wealthiest lived behind gates and hedges, a legal document that basically forbade me from speaking about anything I might see or hear, and a check for $10,000 just for showing up. $10,000. That was 3 months of rent, new equipment for the cafe, Security for the first time in years. But looking at that check, all I felt was cold dread. Into the lion's den. I spent the entire day in a state of paralyzed indecision. My rational mind screamed at me to ignore the invitation, to go to the police despite Tai-Jin's warning, to run. But another part of me, the part that had heard the sadness in the old man's voice, that had seen the exhaustion in his eyes, couldn't forget his final words. Kindness will always be repaid. Was this the repayment? Being dragged into whatever world he and his terrifying son inhabited? By 6 p.m., I'd made my decision. I would go. Not because of the money or the threats, but because a dying man had asked to see me. Because I'd been raised to honor my elders, even ones who apparently controlled half of Seattle's underworld. I put on the only nice dress I owned, a simple navy blue sheath my mother had bought me for job interviews, and waited on the curb outside my apartment building. At precisely 6:30, a black Mercedes pulled up. So quiet, I barely heard it. The driver, Junho from last night, opened the rear door without a word. The drive took 20 minutes through increasingly affluent neighborhoods, ending at a gate that slid open automatically. The house beyond was a modern masterpiece of glass and stone, set on at least 3 acres of meticulously maintained gardens. It looked like something from an architecture magazine utterly out of place in rainy Seattle. Junho led me not to the main entrance, but around the side to a smaller door that opened into what looked like a private wing. The interior was a study in minimalist elegance. Clean lines, expensive but understated furniture, walls adorned with traditional Korean art alongside contemporary pieces. "Mr. Han is in the sunroom," Junho said softly, his tone more gentle than I'd expected. "He's been looking forward to your visit." He left me at a set of French doors that opened onto a glass-enclosed room filled with plants and soft evening light. Han sat in a wheelchair by the windows, a blanket across his lap, looking out at the garden. He seemed smaller than I remembered, more fragile. But when he turned at the sound of my footsteps, his smile was genuine and warm. "Maya," he said, and his joy was so evident it made my chest tight. "You came. I wasn't certain you would." "You sent 4 very convincing bodyguards," I said, moving to sit in the chair beside him, "and your son made it clear refusal wasn't an option." His face fell slightly. "Tai-Jin means well, but he approaches everything like a military operation. I apologize if he frightened you. That wasn't my intention." "Then what was your intention?" I asked gently. "Why am I here, Hansi?" He was quiet for a moment, his gaze returning to the garden where shadows were lengthening across perfectly manicured lawns. When he spoke, his voice was soft, contemplative. "I've lived a long life, Maya. 73 years. I came to America with nothing 40 years ago and built an empire. I have wealth, power, respect, and fear in equal measure." He paused. "But sitting in your cafe last night, being treated with simple human kindness by someone who wanted nothing from me, that was the first time in decades I felt like a person rather than a position. Do you understand?" I thought I was beginning to. "You're lonely." "I'm dying," he corrected gently. "And I'm alone. My wife passed 5 years ago. She was the only person who knew me, truly knew me, before I became what I am now. Since then, everyone who approaches me wants something. Favor, money, protection, mercy." His hand trembled slightly as he adjusted the blanket. "Except you. You just saw an old man in the rain and helped him. Nothing more complicated than that." "It wasn't that special," I protested. "Anyone would have—" "No." His voice was firm. "They wouldn't, and that's precisely why you're special." Before I could respond, the door opened and Tai-Jin entered, carrying a tray with tea and what looked like an array of Korean dishes. Banchan, japchae, beautifully arranged like art. "Dinner," he announced, setting the tray on the small table between us. His eyes met mine, and I saw the warning there. Don't upset him. Tae-jin made this himself, Han said with obvious pride. He doesn't trust anyone else with my food anymore. He's convinced someone will try to poison me. He chuckled, but there was sadness beneath it. As if the cancer won't do the job first. Abeoji, Tae-jin said quietly. The single word, father, holding volumes of emotion he clearly didn't want to show. Sit, Han insisted, gesturing to another chair. Maya, I hope you'll join me. We can talk while we eat. What followed was one of the strangest evenings of my life. Han asked me about my cafe, my books, my family. I learned he'd been a professor of literature before transitioning to business, which I gathered was code for something far less legal. He quoted poetry, both Korean and English, and spoke with deep intelligence about philosophy, art, and the nature of legacy. Tae-jin sat mostly in silence, but I caught him watching me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. He was analyzing me, searching for... what? Weaknesses? Threats? Signs I was trying to manipulate his father? My son doesn't trust easily, Han said, catching the direction of my glance. The world we inhabit makes that impossible. But I want you two to know each other. You're important to me, Maya, and Tae-jin. He looked at his son with profound affection. He's my legacy, everything I couldn't be. The weight of that statement hung in the air. Tae-jin's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. As the evening wore on, I realized what Han truly wanted: connection. Someone to talk to who saw him as human. Someone who wasn't afraid of him or dependent on him. Just company. When it was finally time to leave, Han clasped my hand with surprising strength. "Will you come again?" he asked. "Once a week, perhaps. I would pay you, of course, for your time." The offer sat between us, loaded with implications I was still trying to understand. This wasn't just about companionship. There was something else happening here, something involving his son's intense scrutiny and the security that surrounded this house. But looking at the hope in Han's eyes, I found I couldn't refuse. "Yes," I heard myself say, "I'll come." His smile was radiant. "Good. That's good." Tae-jin walked me to the car, his expression unreadable. Just before I got in, he spoke quietly, his voice for my ears only. "Whatever you're planning, whatever angle you're working, I'll find it." I turned to face him, anger finally overriding my fear. "I'm not planning anything. I'm not working an angle. Your father asked for company, and I said yes because he's dying and deserves some kindness in his final weeks. That's all. No one is that selfless." "Maybe not in your world," I shot back, "but in mine, sometimes people just help because it's the right thing to do." For a moment, something flickered in his eyes, surprise or maybe a reevaluation. Then the mask was back. "We'll see," he said simply, and closed the car door between us. Damn the price of kindness. Over the next 3 weeks, I fell into a strange routine. Every Wednesday evening, I would close the cafe early, put on my navy dress, and let Junho drive me to the house in Washington Park. I would spend 3 hours with Han, talking, reading to him when he was too tired, sometimes just sitting in comfortable silence while he dozed. We discussed everything and nothing. He told me about growing up in Korea during the war, about his wife who'd had the courage to marry a man with dangerous ambitions, about the son he was so proud of but couldn't quite connect with anymore. Tae-jin was different as a boy, he told me one evening, his voice wistful. Gentle, curious. He wanted to be a poet. Can you imagine? He shook his head. But this life, it requires hardness. I made him hard. That's my greatest regret. I learned that Han's business empire was exactly what I'd suspected, a sophisticated criminal organization that controlled everything from legitimate import-export companies to less savory enterprises. He didn't hide it from me, perhaps because he knew I'd already guessed, or perhaps because at this stage, secrets seemed pointless. "I'm not a good man, Maya," he said simply. "I've done terrible things to build what I have, but I've also protected our community, provided jobs, kept worse predators at bay. The world isn't as simple as good and evil. It's all shades of gray." I didn't know how to respond to that. My conscience warred with my growing affection for this complex, dying man who quoted poetry and ordered violence with equal ease. Tae-jin remained an enigma. He was always present during my visits, usually working on his laptop in the corner of the room, silent but watchful. Occasionally, he would be called away for phone calls that he took in rapid, harsh Korean, his voice cold and commanding. When he spoke to his father, though, something softened in him. Not much. Just a slight warming around the eyes, a gentleness in how he adjusted Han's blanket or refilled his tea. It was in these moments I glimpsed the boy who'd wanted to be a poet. He still didn't trust me. That much was clear from his constant surveillance, the way his eyes followed my every movement, but he'd stopped making accusations, stopped treating me like a threat, until everything changed. It was a Wednesday evening, and I'd just arrived at the house when I sensed immediately that something was wrong. The security presence had tripled, grim-faced men positioned throughout the grounds, tension thick in the air. Junho's face was tight as he led me inside. "What's happening?" I whispered. "Rival organization made a move," he said quietly. "Mr. Han is safe, but it's been a difficult day." I found Han in his sunroom as usual, but Tae-jin was pacing like a caged tiger, his phone in his hand, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. "You shouldn't be here tonight," Tae-jin said immediately upon seeing me. "It's not safe." "I'm already here," I replied, moving to Han's side. The old man looked exhausted, his skin gray with pain. "What happened?" "Nothing that concerns you," Tae-jin snapped. "A warehouse," Han said quietly, ignoring his son's glare. "They bombed one of our warehouses. 3 men injured, 1 dead. A message. Abyoji, don't..." "She should understand what world she's entered," Han interrupted, his voice carrying an edge of his former authority. "Maya, there are people who see my weakening condition as an opportunity. They're testing Tae-jin, seeing if he's ready to lead, if he's ruthless enough to hold what I've built." "I can handle it," Tae-jin said through clenched teeth. "I know you can, my son, but at what cost?" Han's eyes were sad. "Each act of violence takes a piece of your soul. I should know." The room fell silent, heavy with years of complicated father-son dynamics I couldn't begin to understand. "I should go," I said quietly, standing. "Give you 2 time..." "No." Both men spoke simultaneously, then looked at each other in surprise. "Stay," Han said more gently. "Please. This chaos will resolve itself. Right now, I want an hour of peace, of normal conversation, of remembering there's beauty in the world beyond power and violence." He held out a trembling hand to me. "Read to me? From that Hafiz collection we started last week?" So I sat and read Persian poetry to a dying Korean crime boss, while his son made quiet phone calls that probably involved retribution and blood, and somehow it felt both surreal and strangely right. When it was time to leave, Tae-jin walked me out personally, a break from routine that made my pulse quicken. "You're good for him," he said abruptly as we reached the car. "He's calmer when you're here, in less pain, I think." "I'm glad I can help." He studied my face in the dim light, and for once there was no hostility in his gaze. "You really don't want anything, do you? No favor, no money beyond what we already pay you, no leverage." "No," I said simply. "I don't understand people like you." It wasn't an accusation, just a statement of confused fact. "Maybe that's the problem," I suggested gently. "Maybe you're so used to people having ulterior motives that you can't recognize genuine kindness anymore." His laugh was bitter. "Kindness is a luxury in my world, Maya. It gets you killed." What a sad way to live. The words were out before I could stop them, and I immediately regretted them. But instead of anger, Tae-jin just looked tired, unutterably weary. "Yes," he said quietly, "it is." For a moment, we just looked at each other, and I saw past the cold exterior to the man beneath, the one who'd wanted to be a poet, who was watching his father die, who carried the weight of an empire he hadn't chosen but couldn't refuse. "He doesn't have much time left," Tae-jin said finally. "Weeks, maybe. The doctor said he's declining faster than expected." My chest tightened. "I'm sorry. Will you keep coming? Until the end?" "Yes, of course." He nodded, something like relief crossing his features. "Thank you." As Junho drove me home through the dark Seattle streets, I realized I'd crossed a threshold I couldn't uncross. I wasn't just a cafe owner visiting a dying man anymore. I was entangled in something deeper, more complicated, a world of violence and loyalty, of men who quoted poetry and ordered killings, of impossible choices and moral ambiguity. And the most dangerous part? I was starting to care. The final lesson. Han died on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after that conversation. I got the call from Junho at 6 a.m., his voice thick with emotion. "Mr. Han passed peacefully in his sleep. Mr. Tae-jin requests your presence at the funeral. He said his father would have wanted you there." The funeral was held at a private estate, attended by a strange mix of people, legitimate businessmen in expensive suits, clearly dangerous men with hard eyes, and a surprising number of community members from Seattle's Koreatown. I stood in the back, feeling out of place in my simple black dress, watching as person after person paid respects to a man who'd lived a complicated, contradictory life. Tae-jin stood at the front, accepting condolences with stoic dignity. He wore a traditional Korean mourning hanbok, the white fabric making him look both younger and older somehow. I saw the weight settling on his shoulders, the full responsibility of the empire now his alone. After the service, as people mingled and shared memories, Tae-jin found me in the garden where I'd retreated for air. "Thank you for coming," he said formally. "I cared about him," I said simply. Despite everything I knew about him, I genuinely cared. He knew. It mattered to him more than you can imagine. Tae-jin handed me an envelope. "He left this for you." With shaking hands, I opened it. Inside was a letter in Han's careful handwriting. "Dear Maya, if you're reading this, I've finally found peace. Thank you for giving me beauty and kindness in my final weeks. Thank you for seeing me as human. I've left instructions with Tae-jin. Your cafe will never be touched, never threatened. You're under the protection of the Han family for as long as you remain in Seattle. Consider it payment for a debt I could never truly repay. One last request, be patient with my son. He's harder than I ever was, but there's still good in him. You saw glimpses of it, I think. Perhaps in time you can help him find it again. Be well, be happy, be kind. The world needs more people like you." Han tears blurred my vision. I looked up to find Tae-jin watching me, his expression carefully neutral. "He asked me to look after you," he said, "to ensure you're never bothered, never threatened. It's the least I can do to honor his final wishes." "I don't need looking after." Nevertheless, he paused, seeming to struggle with something. "My father saw something in you that he'd lost sight of in this world. Purity of intention, goodness without calculation. He wanted me to see it too." "And do you?" He was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes searching my face. "I'm beginning to. It's disorienting." Despite everything, the funeral, the weight of the moment, I almost smiled. "That might be the most honest thing you've ever said to me." My father taught me that honesty is a rare gift. It should be given sparingly, but to the right people. He held my gaze. "You're the right people, Maya Reyes." "What happens now?" I asked. "To you, to all of this?" "I lead. I protect what my father built. I make hard choices and live with the consequences." His voice was resigned but firm. "It's what I was raised to do." "That's not all you are, though. Your father told me about the boy who wanted to be a poet." Pain flashed across his face. "That boy died a long time ago." "Maybe not." I took a risk, stepping closer. Maybe he's just buried under armor and expectations. Maybe he could still write poetry if someone reminded him he had permission to be more than his father's legacy. For a moment, just a heartbeat, I saw longing in his eyes, the desire to be seen as something other than a weapon, a leader, a successor, to be human. Then the moment passed, and the armor was back. "It's a beautiful thought," he said softly, "but not one I can afford." He started to turn away, but I caught his arm. "Your father's last wish was for you to find the good in yourself again. If you honor his memory in every other way but ignore that, are you really honoring him at all?" Taejin looked at my hand on his arm, then up at my face, and something shifted. Not a transformation, that would take time, but a crack in the facade. A possibility. "You're dangerous, Maya Reyes," he said, but there was no heat in it, almost a hint of admiration. "You make me think about things I've spent years trying not to think about." "Good. Your father would be pleased." He smiled then, a real smile, small and sad but genuine. "He would. He'd also probably be plotting to make you family somehow if he'd had more time. He had that kind of mind." "And you?" I asked, surprising myself with my boldness. "What kind of mind do you have?" His eyes held mine, and the air between us suddenly felt charged, weighted with something neither of us was ready to name. "The kind that's learning," he said quietly, "that some gifts are worth accepting, even if they're dangerous." 6 months later, the cafe was thriving. After Han's death, I'd received an anonymous donation that allowed me to expand into the vacant space next door, adding more seating and a second room dedicated entirely to books. Business had picked up mysteriously, a steady stream of well-dressed Korean customers who always paid in cash and tipped generously. Protection, I realized. Tae-jin keeping his father's promise. I saw him occasionally, always unexpectedly. He'd arrive without warning, usually in the early morning or late evening when the cafe was nearly empty. We'd talk about books mostly. It turned out he really had loved poetry once. And slowly, over cups of chai and comfortable silence, something between us had shifted. It wasn't romance. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But it was connection, understanding, a strange friendship forged between two people from completely different worlds. On a rainy Wednesday evening, exactly 6 months after I'd first met Han, Tae-jin appeared at closing time. He carried a book which he placed on the counter between us. "I wrote this," he said, his voice holding a vulnerability I'd rarely heard. "For the first time in 15 years, I wrote poetry. My father would have been happy about that." I picked up the slim volume, running my fingers over the cover. "May I read it?" "If you'd like, but Maya—" He paused, and when he looked at me, his eyes held something I'd never seen before. Hope. "Would you have dinner with me? Not as payment, not as obligation, just because I'd like to know you better. The real you, not just the kind cafe owner who saved my father's final weeks." My heart did something complicated in my chest. This was dangerous. This was crossing lines I'd promised myself I'd never cross. His world and mine. They couldn't mix without consequences. But looking at him, seeing the man emerging from beneath the armor, the poet learning to breathe again, I found myself smiling. "Yes," I said, "I'd like that." Because sometimes kindness doesn't have a price. Sometimes it just opens doors, to friendship, to understanding, to possibilities we never imagined. And sometimes those doors lead somewhere beautiful, even if the path is complicated. I'd helped a stranger in the rain, and it had changed everything, and I wouldn't take it back for anything in the world.